Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Yet another example of the failure of Fiat. Let's explore. Fiat currencies are something that we all are quite accustomed to. There's something to be said for a government decree. As much as we hate it, as much as that makes us cringe, those of us especially in this community, well, we all have faith in them. And we all utilize our paper currencies in everyday transactions. Even if we don't actually touch the notes themselves, they are being transacted at least digitally. In fact, more and more we're seeing movements towards essentially a cashless society, which in one way is quite scary. In fact, in many ways it's quite scary, and we are heading in that direction, especially with what is known as the Great Reset, and they're talking openly about that kind of transformation. And along with that, there will be a revaluation, and there will be certain things tied to these dollars because of the technology behind the dollars and whatever other denominations that will be a part of this, whether it be from the International Monetary Fund or from whatever central bank your nation is attributed. So therefore, it's something to take into account and to consider for every transaction we make. But up until this point, fiat currencies have all failed. Some have just had failed quicker than others. And what we're seeing today is almost a repeat of what you see before you here with this note. The $100 trillion bill, which is the largest inflationary note in world history. And this is from the Bank of Zimbabwe, and I hold this note as an example to what can happen to fiat currencies. And right now in the news, very recently, we have heard about Venezuela doing pretty much what Zimbabwe did, but not as grand a scale. They are going to be cutting 6 zeros off the Bolivar to simplify transactions. Bloomberg reports that they are preparing to, again, lop off zeros from the national currency in an attempt to simplify daily transactions, and which sometimes barely fit on a calculator or require multiple swipes of their credit cards or their bank cards. The central bank is planning to slash 6 zeros from the Bolivar as early as August after previous attempts to issue larger denomination bills failed to resolve problems created by endemic inflation. In other words, hyperinflation, according to 3 people with direct knowledge of the matter, who really they're not authorized to speak publicly about the plan, so they're anonymous sources. It means that $1 would fetch 3.2 bolivars instead of 3,219,000 bolivars at present. Venezuela last carried out a redenomination of the bolivar in 2018, and in March began printing 1 million bolivar note, which was the largest in the country's history. But that bill is now worth just 32 cents and isn't enough to buy a cup of coffee. Since 2008, the government, first under the late Hugo Chavez and then under the current president Nicolas Maduro, has removed 8 zeros from the currency as hyperinflation decimated people's savings. While the country has now informally adopted the U.S. dollar as their currency, it's something that is being utilized now for the transactions as the U.S. dollar for most of these transactions. Most Venezuelans only earn bolivars, and the local currency is needed for things like bus fare, parking, and tips. I've also heard reports of people using even silver for transactions. And of course, we know that silver, like gold, is a metal that essentially cannot be debased. It cannot be really manipulated the way dollars can by governments. I know some people think it can, and they're and they have made arguments to some extent. There is some of that, but by and large, the intrinsic value of silver and gold cannot be. Whereas, know what happens with these. So there you go. The dollar is being utilized and substituted, and we've seen that in other nations as well. The push for simplifying Bolivar transactions has come largely from companies who have raised the issue with the government. Things like paying taxes and dealing with other accounting calculations have become absurdly complex. This has been desperately awaited by businesses due to serious operational consequences that come from the overflow of digits in the system, said economist Tamara Herrera, head of consulting firm Synthesis Financiera. The central bank didn't respond to several requests for comment, while the government declined to comment on the matter. While previous attempts to relaunch the currency by cutting off zeros and printing new bills have failed shortly after implementation, a series of recent reforms that have slowed consumer price gains may mean that it has a better chance of sticking now. Following the second largest hyperinflation stretch in the country's history, annual inflation is down 2,339% a year from more than 300,000% in 2019, according to Bloomberg's Cafe con Leche Index. On a monthly basis, price gains slowed even further by about 20% in May from April. The central bank no longer publishes regular inflation data. Well, doesn't that sound like kind of what's happening with the Federal Reserve? They're not publishing regular data as well, too, like the M2 money supply, which is quite interesting how that is occurring here, even with the most powerful currency in the world. Venezuela's economy may have hit bottom after 7 years of economic contraction, during which the currency became virtually worthless amid crashing oil prices and unchecked state spending. Under pressure by U.S. sanctions, the government was forced to scrap some price controls, reduce subsidies on goods, including gasoline, and remove many restrictions on foreign exchange, which may allow the economy to grow this year. Everyone has been affected by the huge lag in providing cash for the country, Herrera said. Without a real economic stabilization program, we will need another redenomination in a few years. Of course, really the bottom line with what's happened in Venezuela is unchecked socialism. And also, you have a dictator in power there in Venezuela, and that is causing that, coupled with, obviously human rights violations as well, treating his population horribly, and somebody who is in office by cheating on the election, and unchecked socialism has caused the problems of Venezuela. And it's too bad because they were once the most prosperous nation in South America. But nonetheless, they are doing that. And so what happened with the Zimbabwe $100 trillion bill? Well, this bill is dated November of 2008, you can see here. And I don't have one of the new dollars, but in January of 2009, they released their new Zimbabwe dollar. And that's another example of, well, hey, you can't put a lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig, still fiat currency. And so that is what's happened here with the Zimbabwe note, and that's what's happening with the Venezuelan dollar or Bolivar as well, too. And so they are using U.S. dollars, which, by the way, as we know, this note here, we're the most powerful nation in the world with the strongest currency in the world, and we are not immune from the laws of economics. You print more of these, it's going to cause inflation. That's exactly what is happening. Now, one thing is abundantly clear. It's a lot harder to kill the dollar than it is to kill the Zimbabwean dollar or the Bolivar or a myriad of these other currencies out there. But nonetheless, it can be killed. And they understand this, the powers that be, for sure, which is why they are working to reset the dollar or to modernize it. And they will be doing that with other currencies as well. And they're going to use essentially the blockchain as the means and method to do it, which means that they will have more control over transactions with what is spent, and they will be able to essentially track your every move with these new dollars. Whereas these notes here, well, they can't track them as cash anyway, but less and less people are using it voluntarily. Not me, I continue to use cash. For that very reason, I don't like to be independent of the system. I like my dollars to count for something other than being tracked. Although these dollars count for much less these days than even a year ago, or even 2 years ago, or even 3 months ago. And so there it is. And it's a matter of time where what we're seeing with things like the Zimbabwean note, well, what happens? Well, the Zimbabwean note created the new dollar, the new Zimbabwean dollar. And what's going to happen? We're going to see things like we started to see in Germany some years ago, where they hyperinflated their note, the Weimar Republic, and something to see. Some of these are quite beautiful notes, but essentially what happens is, well, the currencies end up failing. They end up being reset, revalued, and then those notes that made up those currencies, well, they become worth pennies on the dollar. This stuff you can find anywhere, every place. It's crazy. Stuff is so common, and they are essentially just paper works of art, quite beautiful, but nonetheless, they're not really worth a whole lot. They're literally worth the paper they're printed on, if that. That's essentially what it boils down to. And so when you have currencies that are in that manner of form, and they just essentially become just the paper they're worth, maybe not even the paper they're worth. There's images of people going around the streets in Zimbabwe picking up these notes on the ground, just leaving them there just because they're not worth a whole lot. But right now, the dollar is cash, and cash is king, essentially, to this day, even though it's by design devaluing every year. But if we're not careful, we're not immune. If we're not careful, if we keep going down the path that we're going on, it's not going to be long before this essentially turns into this. And this could be much less than this in terms of value. So that's something to take into consideration here. And then sooner or later, you never know what may happen. These may become toilet paper, or worth as much as toilet paper, or even less than toilet paper. $1 million. But what is certainly something of value that never goes away, no matter what? Silver. That's right. Silver is something that will continue to be worth whatever it is, whatever it weighs per dollar. This says $0.50 on it. It's obviously worth much more than $0.50. Silver. It contains and maintains its value no matter what is stamped on the coins. That will never change. Silver. It has been money for thousands of years, and it is money right now. It is not used as money. It is essentially hibernating money. It is not used as currency, but nonetheless, it does hold those properties. We're going to continue to do so. And then there's gold. That's right. Gold is the ultimate form of money that central banks, by the way, at the same time that they essentially add zeros and take zeros away ad nauseum, well, you can't take that away from the value of gold. Gold continues to maintain a store of value, whatever form that it comes. This says $20 on it. You can be rest assured that it's worth a lot more than $20. And there you have it. We know what sound money is. That's why they call it sound money. Gold and silver. No matter what happens, no matter what the powers that be do to our currencies, they can manipulate those all day long, and they do. But they cannot manipulate the true value of gold and silver. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch this video, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.